The old dog did something in the shelter that made every employee stop talking at the exact same time. Claire Bennett didn't even notice the senior golden mix at first. She had only come to the Maple Grove Animal Shelter because her therapist kept telling her she needed something alive in her apartment besides old coffee mugs and unopened mail. Rain hammered the parking lot outside as she signed the visitor sheet, barely listening while a young shelter worker named Megan explained that most of the dogs in the back hall were seniors waiting for hospice adoption. Claire nodded politely, already planning to leave in 5 minutes. Then a loud metallic crash echoed from the last kennel in the building. One of the food bowls had somehow slammed against the bars hard enough to spin across the concrete floor. "Rusty!" Megan shouted in shock. Claire turned just as an elderly dog struggled to his feet inside the kennel. He looked exhausted, his reddish fur faded almost white around the face, one ear bent awkwardly with age. But the second he saw Claire, his entire body froze. The dog stared at her so intensely that it made her stomach tighten. Shelter dogs barked all the time. They jumped. They whined. But this dog didn't make a sound. He simply stood there trembling like he had seen a ghost. "That's weird," Megan muttered under her breath. Claire took a small step backward. The dog immediately pressed himself against the kennel door so hard the metal rattled again. His cloudy eyes never left her face. "Has he done that before?" Claire asked quietly. Megan shook her head. "No. Honestly, he barely moves anymore." The hallway suddenly felt colder than before. Claire forced a nervous laugh and started turning away, but then the dog let out a low cry unlike anything she had ever heard. It wasn't barking. It sounded almost human. The noise stopped her instantly. Rusty slowly lowered himself onto the kennel floor without breaking eye contact, then placed one paw against the bottom of the gate like he was trying to reach her. Claire felt goosebumps spread across her arms. "How long has he been here?" she asked. "Almost 7 months," Megan said softly. "Nobody wanted him. Because of his age." Claire glanced at the laminated information card hanging beside the kennel. "Senior mixed breed. Estimated age, 14 years old. Found wandering alone near Ashbury Road." Claire frowned. Ashbury Road sat less than 2 miles from the neighborhood where she grew up as a kid before her family suddenly moved away. She hadn't thought about that town in over 20 years. Rusty suddenly began pacing in small, anxious circles, limping slightly as his nails scraped across the concrete. Then he stopped beside a faded red umbrella leaning near the supply closet. The dog sniffed at once and immediately looked back at Claire again, whining harder now. Her breathing slowed. She had owned a red umbrella exactly like that when she was little. Same curved wooden handle. Same white stitched stripe near the edge. "Okay. That's creepy," Claire whispered. Megan looked confused. "What is?" But before Claire could answer, Rusty did something that made the fear hit her for real. The old dog carefully lowered his head onto the kennel floor, and with shaking paws, he covered his eyes as if he already knew she was about to leave him again. Claire should have walked out of the shelter right then, but something about the old dog's face refused to leave her alone. Even after she stepped into the rain outside, she could still picture Rusty lying on the concrete floor with his paws covering his eyes like he understood disappointment too well. She sat inside her car for nearly 10 minutes with the windshield wipers scraping back and forth while the storm blurred the parking lot lights into pale yellow streaks. Finally, she exhaled sharply, grabbed her purse again, and walked back inside. Megan looked genuinely surprised to see her return. "That was fast," she said gently. Claire shrugged awkwardly. "I just wanted to ask a few more questions." Megan led her toward a small office beside the kennels while Rusty remained completely still behind the gate, watching Claire every second she moved. "We do not know much about him," Megan explained as she pulled up a digital intake form. "Animal control found him wandering near Ashbury Road last winter during a cold snap. No. Chip." No owner came forward. Claire folded her arms tighter across her chest. "How old did you say he was?" "The vet estimates 14, maybe older." Claire glanced through the office window. Rusty had finally lowered his paws from his face, but he still had not stopped staring toward her. "Does he act like that with everybody?" Megan shook her head slowly. "Honestly, most days he barely reacts at all." She hesitated before continuing. "At first we thought he was sick because he refused to eat whenever someone adopted another dog nearby. He would just lie there facing the wall for hours." Claire frowned. "What do you mean?" 3 different times families almost took him home," Megan said quietly. But every time the paperwork started, he panicked. Claire looked confused. Panicked how? Megan lowered her voice instinctively. He would wait by the front entrance all day long like he was expecting someone else. Then when the families came back for him, he refused to move. Claire stared at Rusty through the glass again. The old dog had slowly dragged himself closer to the office door now, his tired body pressed against the bottom gap, as if simply hearing her voice mattered. One man even tried carrying him outside, Megan whispered. Rusty cried so hard the entire lobby stopped. A strange heaviness settled into Claire's chest. She did not understand why hearing that hurt so much. Megan opened another file. The weirdest part is what he does every night. Claire looked up immediately. What? At exactly 7:30, he walks to the last kennel window and just sits there. Why? Megan gave a helpless shrug. Nobody knows. He stares at the parking lot like he is waiting for a specific car. Claire felt the skin on her arms tighten again. 7:30. For some reason the number bothered her. It felt familiar in a way she could not explain. Before she could think further, a loud crack of thunder shook the building. Rusty suddenly jolted upright. His breathing became fast and uneven as he limped toward the office window. Claire instinctively stepped closer to the glass. The old dog pressed his nose against it immediately, tail wagging weakly for the first time. Then Claire noticed something that made her pulse slow. Rusty was not looking at her face anymore. He was staring directly at the silver charm bracelet hanging from her wrist, a bracelet she had owned since she was 8 years old. And when Claire slowly lifted her hand closer to the glass, the old dog shut his eyes and leaned against the window like he had finally found something he had been searching for a very long time. Claire told herself she was being irrational, but 30 minutes later, she was still sitting inside the shelter office filling out temporary foster paperwork she had never planned to sign. Megan kept smiling like she was afraid Claire might suddenly change her mind and disappear. Rusty, meanwhile, had become strangely restless. The second Megan clipped a leash onto his collar, the old dog did not head toward the exit like most shelter animals did. Instead, he pulled hard in the opposite direction toward a narrow hallway lined with storage lockers and old donation bins. Rusty, come on, buddy, Megan laughed nervously. But the dog planted his paws firmly against the floor. His cloudy eyes locked onto Claire again before he tugged toward the hallway a second time. What is back there? Claire asked. Nothing important, Megan replied. Just old storage. Yet Rusty refused to move until Claire finally followed him down the dim hallway herself. The old fluorescent lights buzzed overhead while rainwater tapped softly against a tiny window near the ceiling. Rusty limped directly toward a stack of forgotten cardboard boxes beside the last locker and began pawing frantically at the floor underneath them. Not scratching randomly. Deliberately. Megan frowned. That is new. Claire crouched beside him. What are you trying to do? Rusty let out a sharp whine and shoved his nose beneath the bottom box. Megan eventually moved the stack aside, revealing nothing except dust and cracked tile. But the second the floor became visible, Rusty stopped instantly. He stared at a faded blue sticker stuck near the wall. Claire's chest tightened. The sticker showed a cartoon moon with tiny silver stars around it. She had not seen one in years, but somehow she recognized it immediately. Her elementary school used to hand those exact stickers out during reading competitions when she was a kid. That is impossible, Claire whispered under her breath. Megan looked confused. What? Claire quickly shook her head and stood up too fast. Rusty continued staring at the sticker for nearly 10 full seconds before finally allowing Megan to guide him toward the exit. The entire drive to Claire's apartment felt unsettlingly quiet. Rusty did not whine or bark once. He sat completely still in the back seat despite the thunderstorm outside, watching the passing streets through the window with eerie focus. Then halfway through downtown, the dog suddenly stood up so abruptly that Claire nearly swerved. Rusty pressed himself against the glass and began pawing at the window hard enough to leave streaks across it. Hey, calm down, Claire muttered nervously. But Rusty ignored her completely. They had just stopped at a red light beside an old grocery store with a faded green sign hanging above the entrance. Rusty let out a desperate cry and kept scratching at the glass until the light changed. The moment Claire drove away, the dog stopped again and slowly sat back down. Claire glanced repeatedly into the rearview mirror. What is wrong with you? She whispered. Back at the apartment, things became even stranger. Rusty wandered slowly through every room like he was searching for something specific. He ignored the expensive dog bed Claire bought on the way home, ignored the bowl of fresh food, ignored water. Instead, he dragged himself down the hallway toward a small linen closet beside Claire's bedroom and refused to leave. "There is nothing in there," Claire said softly. But Rusty kept circling the closet door anxiously. Then, just after midnight, Claire woke to a sound that made her blood run cold. Not barking, not scratching, singing. The old dog was sitting alone in the dark hallway, making a low rhythmic sound almost like a broken melody. Claire stepped out of bed slowly, heart pounding. Rusty immediately stopped the moment he saw her. Then he turned toward the closet door again, and very gently rested his paw against the knob, like he wanted her to open it. Claire barely slept after that night in the hallway. Every time she closed her eyes, she could still hear the strange melody Rusty had been making outside the linen closet. By morning, exhaustion had settled behind her eyes like pressure. She opened the closet door expecting to find something obvious hidden inside, but there was nothing except old towels, cleaning supplies, and stacked plastic bins filled with things she had not unpacked since moving into the apartment 3 years earlier. Rusty pushed past her the second the door opened. His stiff body trembled with urgency as he sniffed every shelf, every corner, every box. Then suddenly he froze beside a faded blue storage bin near the bottom shelf. Claire watched nervously as the old dog pressed his forehead against it and let out a soft cry. "What is in there?" she muttered. She pulled the bin into the hallway and opened it carefully. Inside were random childhood items her mother had mailed her years ago after selling the family home. Old notebooks, framed school pictures, cracked Christmas ornaments. Nothing unusual. But Rusty became more agitated the longer the box stayed open. He started pushing things aside with his nose faster and faster until Claire grabbed his collar instinctively. "Stop it," she snapped, more sharply than she intended. Rusty immediately flinched backward. The reaction hit Claire harder than she expected. The old dog lowered himself onto the floor and looked away from her completely. Guilt twisted in her stomach. "I am sorry," she whispered softly. But Rusty no longer seemed interested in the box. Instead, he limped quietly toward the living room window and stared outside for nearly an hour without moving. Later that afternoon, Claire called Megan hoping for answers. "I think something is wrong with him," she admitted quietly over the phone. "He keeps fixating on random things in my apartment. He barely eats. He acts nervous all the time." Megan sounded concerned. "That can happen with senior rescues," she explained carefully. "Sometimes old dogs develop confusion or anxiety disorders." Claire looked across the apartment. Rusty was sitting beside the front door now, staring at the deadbolt without blinking. He also keeps waiting by the door like he expects somebody. Megan hesitated before answering. "Claire, there is something else I did not tell you because I did not want to scare you off." Claire straightened immediately. "What?" "A few weeks before you came in, another foster family returned him." Claire frowned. "Returned him for what?" "They said he became obsessed with their daughter's room." A cold feeling crept into Claire's chest. Megan continued carefully. "He would scratch at her closet every night and refuse to sleep anywhere else." Eventually, the parents got uncomfortable. Claire slowly looked toward her own hallway closet. "Did he hurt anyone?" "No," Megan answered quickly. "Never." But the family said his behavior kept getting stranger. Claire thanked her and hung up, but the conversation stayed in her head all evening. By sunset, the apartment felt tense in a way she could not explain. Every small sound made her glance toward Rusty. Every movement he made seemed loaded with meaning. Around 8 o'clock, Claire finally decided she needed fresh air. She grabbed her coat and keys while Rusty watched from the hallway. "Come on," she sighed softly. "We are taking a walk." But the second Claire opened the apartment door, Rusty panicked. Not excited panic. Fear. The old dog rushed forward with surprising speed and blocked the doorway with his body. Claire stared down at him in shock. Rusty moved. He did not. His breathing became uneven as he pressed himself harder against the open door. Claire tried guiding him gently with the leash, but the dog suddenly twisted around and grabbed the bottom of her sweater sleeve between his teeth. Not aggressively. Desperately. Claire's heart began pounding. "Okay, enough." Rusty released her instantly, but his eyes stayed locked on her face with pure panic. At that exact moment, Claire's phone buzzed. It was Megan. Her voice sounded shaken the second Claire answered. "Claire, I think you need to bring Rusty back to the shelter tonight before this gets worse. Claire stood frozen in the middle of her apartment while Megan's words echoed through the phone. Rusty had finally backed away from the doorway, but he still had not taken his eyes off her. The storm outside had grown heavier, rain rattling against the windows hard enough to shake the glass. What do you mean before this gets worse? Claire asked quietly. Megan hesitated for several seconds. I just think maybe fostering him was too much too fast, she said carefully. Sometimes senior dogs bond in unhealthy ways when they are confused. Claire looked at Rusty again. The old dog was no longer blocking the door now. Instead, he had moved toward the hallway and sat directly beneath the smoke detector near the ceiling, staring upward without moving. He is acting strange right now, Claire admitted. He keeps watching things that are not there. Megan sounded relieved to hear it. That is exactly what the last family described. Claire rubbed her forehead slowly. She wanted Megan to be right because the alternative felt impossible. But deep down, something about Rusty's behavior did not feel random. Confused dogs did not react to exact places, exact objects, exact times. Before Claire could answer, another loud crack of thunder rolled across the city. At the exact same moment, every light inside the apartment flickered once. Rusty immediately stood up. His body stiffened so suddenly that Claire felt her stomach drop. Then the old dog turned toward the kitchen and began limping quickly across the apartment. Rusty. Claire followed him nervously. He stopped beside the refrigerator and started pawing at the tile floor near the wall, not scratching wildly like before. Tapping. 3 quick taps. Pause. Then 3 more. Claire frowned. What are you doing? Rusty whined softly and tapped again. Claire crouched down beside him. At first she saw nothing unusual. Then she noticed a faint brown mark running along the bottom edge of the wall near the electrical outlet. Water. Her pulse slowed. She touched the drywall carefully. Damp. A cold feeling spread through her chest. Claire stood up quickly and opened the small utility cabinet beside the refrigerator. The second she did, a sharp, burnt smell rushed out into the kitchen. Oh my God! One of the old electrical wires inside the wall had blackened badly from water damage. Tiny sparks flickered near the outlet for half a second before disappearing again. Claire stumbled backward in shock. If Rusty had not stopped her from leaving earlier, she would have locked the apartment and stayed out for hours while the storm continued flooding the wall. Her hands began trembling as she grabbed her phone flashlight. Rusty stayed beside the cabinet silently now, watching her carefully. Not panicked anymore. Almost relieved. Claire slowly looked down at him. You were trying to warn me? The old dog lowered himself weakly onto the floor. For the first time all day, his breathing finally seemed calm. Claire's heart twisted painfully. She suddenly remembered Megan mentioning that Rusty always sat by the shelter window at exactly 7:30 every night waiting for a specific car. Not random behavior. Waiting behavior. Memory behavior. Attachment behavior. Claire stared at the old dog for a long moment while rain hammered outside. Then another detail surfaced in her mind. The red umbrella. The sticker. The grocery store. The bracelet. None of those things should have meant anything to a stray senior dog, unless he already knew them. Her phone buzzed again. Megan. Claire looked at the screen but did not answer this time. Slowly, she crouched beside Rusty and brushed her fingers gently through the faded fur around his neck. That was when she felt something hidden beneath the thick collar padding. A tiny hard object sewn carefully into the inside seam. Claire's breathing stopped. Rusty immediately looked away the second she touched it, as if he already knew she was about to find something she was never supposed to forget. Claire grabbed a pair of scissors from the kitchen drawer and whispered softly, I think we need to see what you have been carrying around all these years. Claire carefully slid the scissors beneath the worn collar seam while Rusty remained completely still beside her. The old dog did not resist. He simply rested his tired head against the kitchen floor as rain continued pounding outside the apartment windows. Claire's hands shook as the thread finally loosened. Something tiny slipped free from inside the collar padding and landed softly against the tile. At first she thought it was just an old piece of metal. Then she picked it up. Her breathing stopped instantly. It was a small brass name tag shaped like a half moon, scratched and faded with age. On the front was only one word. Scout. Claire frowned in confusion. Rusty was not written anywhere on it. But the moment she turned the tag over, her knees nearly gave out beneath her. A child's handwriting had been carved messily into the back. If found, please bring him home to Claire Bennett. Her heart slammed against her ribs so hard it hurt. The handwriting was hers. Claire stumbled backward until she hit the kitchen counter. No, she whispered weakly. Rusty slowly lifted his head at the sound of her voice. Claire stared at the tag in disbelief while fragments of memory began crashing through her mind all at once. A golden puppy running through sprinklers in the backyard. Tiny hands tying a red ribbon around a wagging tail. A little girl crying while writing her phone number onto a cheap brass tag because she was terrified of losing her dog someday. Scout. Not Rusty. Scout had been his real name. Rusty was the name the shelter gave him after finding him alone. Claire's eyes filled instantly. She had not thought about Scout in over 20 years. Not truly. After her father lost his job, her family moved suddenly in the middle of the night to another state. Everything happened so fast that 8-year-old Claire had believed Scout ran away during the chaos. For years, she carried guilt over leaving him behind. Eventually, the memories faded into the blurry corners of childhood. But now the truth sat trembling on her kitchen floor staring back at her. You found me, Claire whispered brokenly. Rusty slowly stood and limped toward her. The old dog pressed his forehead gently against her leg exactly the way he used to when thunderstorms scared him as a puppy. Claire collapsed onto the floor beside him, crying openly now. Every strange thing suddenly made sense. The grocery store, the reading sticker, the closet, the waiting by the door, even the melody in the hallway. Claire suddenly remembered singing the same tune to Scout during storms when she was little because loud thunder terrified him. He had not been confused. He had been remembering. The realization hit Claire even harder when she understood the truth about the apartment fire risk. Rusty had not simply sensed danger. He had stopped her from leaving because he remembered what happened the last time she disappeared from his life. The old dog had been trying to keep her safe the only way he knew how. Claire wrapped both arms around him while tears soaked into his faded fur. I thought you were gone forever, she whispered. Rusty gave a weak wag of his tail, but did not pull away. Then another memory surfaced suddenly, so sharp it made Claire freeze. The final day before her family moved, Scout had vanished for hours during a storm. Claire's father told her they could not wait any longer and promised the dog probably found another family. But now, Claire slowly looked down at the old brass tag in her shaking hand. The collar had been sewn shut deliberately. Someone had hidden his identity for years. And for the first time since bringing him home, Claire realized something that made her feel completely sick inside. Scout never ran away from her. Someone had taken him away before she ever had the chance to say goodbye. Claire stayed on the kitchen floor with Scout for a long time while the storm slowly weakened outside. The old dog leaned heavily against her chest, exhausted from emotions his aging body had apparently carried for decades. Every few minutes Claire would pull back just enough to look at his face again, almost afraid he might disappear if she blinked. She noticed details now that she should have recognized hours ago. The tiny white patch above his right eyebrow. The crooked bend near the tip of his tail from when he got stuck under the backyard fence as a puppy. Even the way he tilted his head slightly whenever she whispered his name. Scout. Not Rusty. Scout lifted his tired eyes the moment she finally said it aloud again. His tail thumped softly against the floor. Claire immediately covered her mouth with trembling fingers as another wave of guilt crashed through her. You remembered me this whole time, she whispered brokenly. And I did not even know who you were. Scout slowly rested his chin across her knee. The simple gesture shattered her completely because suddenly she remembered something else from childhood. Whenever Claire cried as a little girl, Scout used to do the exact same thing until she stopped. He was comforting her again. Even now, even after everything. Claire felt sick thinking about how afraid he must have been at the shelter. Watching strangers pass by every day while waiting for someone he still believed would come back for him. The realization hurt even more when she remembered the previous foster families. They thought he was unstable, difficult, broken. But every strange behavior suddenly had meaning now. The closets, the waiting by doors, the reactions to familiar places. Scout had not been confused. He had spent years searching for pieces of the only home he still remembered. Claire wiped her eyes quickly and grabbed her phone from the counter. Her hands were shaking so badly, she almost dropped it while dialing her mother's number. It was nearly midnight, but she did not care. After several rings, a sleepy voice finally answered. Claire. Mom. Claire's voice cracked immediately. Did Dad give away Scout? Silence filled the line so suddenly it became answer enough. Claire closed her eyes. Mom. Her mother finally exhaled shakily. Your father thought it would be easier for you, she admitted quietly. Scout kept trying to jump into the moving truck while we packed. Your father said he found someone nearby willing to take him. Claire felt tears spilled down her face again. You told me he ran away. We thought forgetting would hurt less. Claire looked down at Scout curled weakly against her legs. Forgetting had not hurt him less. It had simply left him waiting. Do you know who took him? Claire asked desperately. No, her mother whispered. We never saw the family again after we left town. After the call ended, Claire sat silently beside Scout while the apartment hummed softly around them. The old dog had finally relaxed completely for the first time since arriving. His breathing was slow now, peaceful. Claire gently brushed her fingers through the fur behind his ears while guilt twisted deeper inside her chest. She almost sent him back to the shelter. She almost believed he was dangerous. She almost ignored every sign he had been trying to show her. Scout suddenly lifted his head again and nudged something toward her with his nose. The faded blue storage bin from the closet still sat open nearby. A small photograph had slid loose from one of the notebooks during everything that happened. Claire picked it up slowly. It showed 8-year-old Claire sitting cross-legged on a front porch holding a golden puppy wearing a red ribbon around his neck. Written across the bottom in faded marker were 4 simple words. Best friends forever. Claire pressed the photo against her chest and looked down at Scout with tears running freely now. I am not losing you again, she whispered. Then she reached for her car keys and softly said, Tomorrow we are going back to Ashbury Road together, and this time I am finding out exactly what happened to you. The next morning the storm had finally passed, leaving the streets washed clean beneath a pale gray sky. Claire packed the car quietly while Scout rested near the apartment door, watching her every movement. For the first time since she brought him home, there was no panic in his eyes when she picked up her keys. Instead, the old dog slowly stood on aching legs and walked toward the elevator before she even called him. It was as if he already knew where they were going. The drive to Ashbury Road took almost an hour. Claire had not returned to that neighborhood since she was a child, and every mile felt stranger than the last. Scout stayed awake the entire ride, sitting upright despite his age, his nose twitching softly whenever familiar streets appeared outside the window. When they finally turned onto the old residential road, Claire barely recognized it. The houses looked smaller now. The giant maple trees that once shaded the sidewalks had grown tall enough to nearly cover the street completely. Some homes were freshly painted while others sat weathered and quiet. But Scout reacted. Immediately, the old dog pressed his paws gently against the dashboard and let out a soft breath that sounded almost relieved. Claire slowed the car until they reached the small yellow house where she spent most of her childhood. Someone else lived there now. A young couple's bicycles rested near the porch steps, and wind chimes swayed softly above the front door. Claire parked across the street without speaking. Scout stared at the house silently for several seconds. Then something unexpected happened. Instead of pulling toward the front yard, the old dog slowly turned his head toward the house beside it. An older white home with faded shutters and an overgrown garden. What is it? Claire whispered. Scout carefully climbed down from the seat and moved toward the sidewalk the moment she opened the car door. His limp seemed worse today, but he kept going with quiet determination until he stopped in front of the neighboring porch. Claire followed close behind. Before she could knock, the front door creaked open by itself. An elderly man with silver hair stared at them in complete disbelief. The grocery bag in his hands slipped slightly as his eyes locked onto Scout. No way, the man whispered. Scout's tail gave a slow wag. Claire felt her pulse quicken. Excuse me, she said carefully. Do you know this dog? The man looked stunned for several seconds before answering. I know that ribbon. Claire froze. The old man pointed toward the faded red ribbon still tied loosely around Scout's collar. Your dog used to carry that thing around everywhere after you left. Claire felt tears sting her eyes immediately. You knew him? The man nodded slowly. Name is Howard. I lived next door when you were little. Memories flickered faintly in Claire's mind now. A kind neighbor who used to shovel snow from their driveway every winter. My father said Scout ran away, she whispered shakily. Mr. Howard looked down at the dog sadly. No, sweetheart. He did not run away. Claire's chest tightened. Mr. Howard explained that after Claire's family moved, Scout kept returning to the empty house every single day, waiting by the porch steps. Weeks passed, then months. Eventually, Mr. Howard started feeding him because nobody else would. I tried bringing him inside plenty of times, the old man admitted softly. But every evening, he would sit facing the road until dark like he still believed your car would come back. Claire covered her mouth as tears rolled down her cheeks again. Scout slowly walked toward the porch steps and lowered himself onto the exact corner beside the railing. The same place where he had apparently waited all those years ago. But this time he did not stare at the road. Instead, the old dog looked up at Claire calmly and rested his chin against her shoe with complete trust. No fear, no confusion, no waiting anymore. And as Claire knelt beside him beneath the quiet morning wind, she realized Scout was no longer trying to find his way home. He finally knew he already had. Claire and Scout stayed on Mr. Howard's porch until the afternoon sunlight slowly drifted across the quiet neighborhood. For hours, stories moved gently between them like pieces of a life that had finally found its missing parts again. Mr. Howard explained how Scout spent years wandering between familiar places after Claire's family disappeared. The old grocery store, the elementary school fence, the bus stop near the park. Always searching, always waiting. I used to think he remembered routes, Mr. Howard said softly while watching Scout sleep near the porch railing. But now I think he remembered feelings. Claire looked down at the old dog curled peacefully at her feet. Scout no longer seemed restless. For the first time since she found him, his body looked completely relaxed, as if some invisible weight had finally been lifted from him. Before leaving, Claire asked Mr. Howard one final question that had been sitting heavily in her chest all day. Why did you sew the tag into his collar? The old man smiled sadly. Because every few years someone tried adopting him and changing his name. Claire felt her throat tighten again. I was afraid one day he would forget who he belonged to. Claire could not speak after that. On the drive home, Scout slept almost the entire way curled against the passenger seat with the faded red ribbon resting beside him. The city skyline slowly appeared ahead through soft evening light, but the apartment no longer felt cold to Claire anymore. That night, she did something she had not done in years. She unpacked every remaining storage box in the closet. Old school drawings covered the living room floor. Childhood books, tiny trophies, family photos. And at the bottom of the final box, Claire found a worn cassette tape labeled Storm Songs. Her chest tightened instantly. She found an old player online that same evening and sat quietly beside Scout while the tape crackled to life. Then a small child's voice filled the apartment. Her voice. 8-year-old Claire softly singing the exact melody Scout used to hum in the hallway during storms. The old dog lifted his head immediately. His cloudy eyes widened with recognition before he slowly walked across the room and laid beside the speaker. Claire watched in silence as Scout closed his eyes and rested peacefully against the sound he had apparently carried in his memory for decades. From that night forward, the apartment changed in small, beautiful ways. Scout no longer waited beside doors. He stopped pacing during thunderstorms. Sometimes Claire would wake up in the middle of the night and find him sleeping deeply instead of watching hallways or windows. It was as though the years of searching had finally ended. A week later, Claire returned to the shelter with new blankets, food, and donations for the senior dog wing. Megan nearly burst into tears when she saw Scout calmly walking beside her without fear. He looks younger, she whispered in disbelief. Claire smiled softly. I think he was just tired of being lost. Word quietly spread through the shelter about the old dog, who found his way back to the little girl he never stopped waiting for. But Claire never cared much about the story becoming special to other people. To her, the miracle was much simpler than that. Every evening around 7:30, she and Scout now sat together by the apartment window while the city lights flickered on below them. Not because he was waiting anymore, because after all those years, he finally had someone to watch the world with again. And sometimes, the ones who wait the longest are the ones who love us the most.